Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, Jim Seibert, and Barry Harrison, and the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast is made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to episode number 52 of Driving the Line podcast. I'm joined here by my co-hosts, Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, and Jim Seibert. And on this episode, we are going to be discussing one of my favorite topics, which is the ATRI top 10 industry issues. This was published back October 12th of 2024. And I want to start by just discussing a little bit who all submitted for the survey and just a little bit of how they conduct the survey. So over 3,700 industry stakeholders across North America weighed in with their opinions on the most important issues affecting the trucking industry and the broad supply chain. The 2024 T2 respondents represented motor carrier executives and personnel that made up 45.9% of the respondents, professional truck drivers, which made up 31.3% of respondents, and other industry stakeholders made up 22.8%. The other included industry suppliers, driver trainers, and law enforcement. In addition to providing an overall ranking, this report includes separate top 10 lists for both commercial driver and American Transportation Research Institute critical issues in the trucking industry. So that being said, let's take a look at what the top 10 lists look like for both truck drivers and motor carriers. So we'll start at number 10 on the truck driver side. This was driver training standards. And then on the motor carrier side, this was the diesel technician shortage. Number 9 for truck drivers was autonomous trucks. And number 9 for the motor carrier side was driver distraction. Number 8 for the truck drivers were fuel prices. And then number 8 for the motor carrier side was battery electric vehicles. 7 for the truck drivers, ELD mandate. And 7 for the motor carrier was truck parking. 6 broker issues for the truck drivers and CSA for motor carriers. 5 speed limiters for truck drivers. And then 5 for the motor carriers were driver retention. Number 4 for truck drivers was detention delay at customer facilities. And 4 for the motor carriers were insurance cost availability. And then number 3 for truck drivers was the economy. And 3 for the motor carriers was the driver shortage. Number 2 for the truck drivers was driver compensation. And number 2 for the motor carriers was lawsuit abuse reform. And then coming in at number 1 on the truck driver side was truck parking. And number 1 on the motor carrier side was the economy. So we've listed them out, fellas. Let's go ahead and open it up. Let's just have a conversation of these top 10 issues.
I think one of the things that is cool about this report that ATRI's been doing for 20 years is that it breaks it down into those two categories. So we've got the motor carrier concerns, we've got the truck driver concerns. And if for those of you listening, if you don't know what ATRI is, it's the American Transportation Research Institute. And they do studies like this to really help make the industry better. It's, all of our state associations, it's giving them information to better help the industry and the folks that are their members in their states. The state DOTs are looking at it. Motor carriers can look at this to better themselves. Industry suppliers can look at this stuff. So it's the information that we're getting from this is to really make the industry better for all those in it. And it's cool, Barry, just like you broke it down there, that it's broken down by what's important or what's a critical issue to a driver and what's a critical issue to a motor carrier. Because sometimes these two things are like almost like polar opposites, but a lot of times there's overlap there. And one of the interesting things that I saw, there were two areas that you mentioned there where it overlapped, where it was important or a critical issue to the drivers as well as to the motor carriers. And the first area was the number one concern for drivers, that's truck parking. Well, that was the number 7 concern for motor carriers. So we've got some overlap there. And then number 3 for the drivers was economy, and that was number 1 for the motor carriers. So we've got some overlap there as well. This past year was an election year. There's always concerns about the economy and what's going on there. Is it going to get better? Is it going to get worse? So certainly there's areas there that's overlap, which I thought was kind of interesting. But as you go back and look at these reports that ATRI puts out, it's interesting to me to see how the industry has been affected by their reports. And I'll give you guys an example because it's not just, they have some other tables that they utilize besides just truck drivers and motor carriers. I mean, there's law enforcement in there. There's overall respondents. So you take all the respondents and don't break them out, and they put the top concerns on there. And if you go back and look, there's a table in the report that they've got. And back in 2015, that's when that ELD mandate was published. And you start looking at what were top concerns. Well, in 2015, hours of service, ELD mandate's in there. 2016, ELD mandate, hours of service was the top 2 from all respondents. And you see this kind of go through the years. And then up at about 2021, right in there, kind of about the time the hours of service changed, those most recent changes we had that really were an improvement to the hours of service, you really kind of saw the ELD mandate and hours of service stuff drop off. Now, is that as a result of ATRI's reports that they're writing and getting critical issues and concerns from the industry, both drivers and carriers? Yeah, I think it probably is to some degree. They're getting good information there. The FMCSA's hearing back from folks, trying to figure out what's going to work best, and trying to listen to the industry and make hours of service regulations that work. So that's kind of a good example of how these reports work. And it's not just, with hours of service, it's not just with regulatory issues. There's some pretty serious things on this list that are coming in, especially with the introduction of a new technology into our industry. There's some pretty serious things coming up. And I've got one here that sticks out to me, but I want to hear from the rest of you guys and what you think. So there's one in particular on this list that I want to talk about. But what sticks out to you guys on this list as far as the drivers' concerns or critical issues and the motor carriers' concerns and critical issues?
Mike, the fact that I like the way you walk through how going all the way back to 2015 when ELD mandate came through and hours of service was a separate category and ELD mandate, but both of them appeared on the list for several years. But then they gradually fell off as the industry became more and more comfortable with how ELDs work, the fact that they could continue operating a trucking company with tighter limits, if you will, on hours of service because the ELD just compelled that. But one thing, and you mentioned that there's a few other list within the report, and one of them is the law enforcement list. And of all things, hours of service still ranks number 2 and think about what that means. So that is police officers across the U.S. that enforce the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulation. They're what we call the CVE, Commercial Vehicle Enforcement Officers from various states and local municipalities and sheriff's departments. And, that their number 1 issue was distracted driving, which I think all of us would agree from an enforcement standpoint, that is a huge issue. But I thought it was ironic. The industry has kind of said, hours of service ELD is not a big deal to us much anymore. But the guys out there writing tickets say it's still a big deal to them. That kind of jumped out. And one other thing you were asking, what really jumped out. You mentioned the 2 overlaps on the driver versus the motor carrier side, which means there were 8 8 topics on either list that didn't make the other list. But ironically, they further broke the drivers down into company drivers and owner operators. And when you look at owner operators and think about what an owner operator is, that's a man or a woman that owns their own truck or maybe even a small fleet of trucks, and they've leased on to some other motor carrier. It's ironic to me, when you own that truck, you actually start thinking more like a motor carrier than a driver. There's the owner operators look at it more from a business perspective, because think about what's the real difference in the two lists. A truck driver, that's his or her job. So they look at it as, what are the items that affect my paycheck? What are the items that affect me being home with my family? What are the items that affect my health? What are the items that affect me personally? And that's why there's so many things on the driver list that doesn't make the motor carrier. The motor carrier looks at it and says, how do I keep this business running? How do I keep making revenue so these 100 families that depend on this company for a living can continue getting paychecks? So when you look at it from, and I'm not saying a driver's being selfish at all. It's natural for every one of us. I mean, all 4 of us on here, we work for a company. Well, we look at it from, how does that impact me personally? But I guarantee you, the owners of this company we work for, they look at it from, how do we stay in business? I mean, it's just 2 different perspectives. And in fact, I'm actually surprised that we even have 2 that make both lists. I mean, yeah. It wouldn't surprise me ever if we have 2 standalone lists that nothing makes both lists to where. But it's understandable, because you got an employee looking at, how is my personal world impacted, and a business owner saying, how do I keep this business running? So the fact that there's 2 overlaps surprises me. Yeah.
I think, to your point, I am very different, but both need. There's nothing wrong with either one of those lists. There's nothing wrong with either one of those things. We need to know both of those things, right? We need to understand what's important to the drivers, what's important to the motor carriers. So I mean, I think you're 100% right. It's no fault of anyone that there's anything on that list. It's like, this is what's important to me. The drivers have a role, the motor carriers have a role, and I think for us and those decision makers in the industry that ATRI is trying to get this information out to, it's important to know this stuff, because the drivers, I mean, honestly, if you're a company driver, they're not thinking about, well, how much is, we've got to get a new contract for our health insurance for our employees. Well, our drivers really aren't thinking about that and don't need to. That would be a motor carrier thing. So it's important to have both those. And I never really thought about that either, Kenny, but it's true. It's, we had 2 categories there that overlapped, but it's really kind of amazing that there's any areas that are the same.
Yeah, I agree.
And that law enforcement list, and by the way, if you're listening to us out there, you guys can get this report from ATRI. All you have to do is go to their website, download this report. They send it to you in an email. You get it right away. It doesn't cost anything. And there's other reports on there as well. But, if you guys are listening to this and want to see this report, want to have it in your hands, you can certainly get that. Just go to atri.trucking.org, find the report, download it, and you can have it. But yeah, the law enforcement table that Kenny mentioned there, where we've got driver distractions number 1, which I completely agree with. Hours of service, CSA, driver training standards, marijuana legalization. It's interesting to me. It's a couple podcasts ago we talked about safety meetings and topics for safety meetings and stuff like that. And I look at the law enforcement list there for their top concerns, and I'm like, man, there's 5 topics right there for a driver safety meeting that you wouldn't have to think about very hard to come up with something on to do a safety meeting. So
you bet. All right. So Mike, you've intrigued me now. What's on the list? That my guess, you ask us to guess. My guess is it's either autonomous trucks or battery electric vehicles, one of the 2. And I may be totally wrong.
Okay. Well, you got it with your second guess there. So last year in 2023, zero emission vehicles showed up on the list, the overall list, for the first time. Well, that's because with any type of technology or anything that's new that's introduced to the industry, when it's at the beginning, we haven't seen them in the past, so there's starting to be more of them, and I feel like with some of the regulations that are coming out regarding these types of vehicles, the aggressive timelines that they have in place for transitioning over to these types of vehicles, the cost of the infrastructure, the cost of the vehicles themselves, things like this. Motor carriers are starting to look at this and say, this is concerning. This is coming our way, and this is concerning. So in 2023, on the overall list, not breaking it out driver remote carrier, just overall list, the zero emission vehicles came in at number 10. Well, guess where they were in 2024? This past year. They moved up to number 6. So now they're even more of a concern because we're hearing more about the regulations, the concerns there. And I don't really want to get down a rabbit trail about the battery electric vehicles or zero emission vehicles, things like this. But it's interesting to me that it popped up year before last, and then this past year in 2024, it's creeping up the list as an area of concern for motor carriers and I really think it's for those areas I just mentioned. For some of the regulations that are coming out regarding these types of vehicles, there's a lot of folks that are concerned about the timeline on those, and are we going to be able to do what they want to do with these vehicles in the time that they're saying we should be able to do them. And then again, just the infrastructure or lack thereof, and the cost of that, putting that in place. And we've talked on this podcast before about the cost of these vehicles being 3-4 times as much as what a diesel truck might be. So that's something that I noticed that stuck out to me. That was pretty interesting. That was just something new that popped up in the last couple of years.
Hey, Mike, and what's interesting was in 2023 at number 3, we had fuel prices, which is not even found on the 2024 list, but we see battery electric vehicles. So it's kind of a switch off there, if you will. We go from worrying about what fuel prices cost to, oh goodness, how are we going to comply with this electronic vehicle stuff going on?
Mike, you and I both were invited last year in 2024 to participate in a webinar on zero emission vehicles, and I know we avoid politics and religion on this podcast. I get that. But our good friend Dave Heller with Truckload Carriers Association was also a guest on that podcast. And he didn't dodge the political aspects of battery electric vehicles to the point of saying that it's driven by politics. And, here we are in 2025. There's a new administration in place. And whether you like that administration or don't, not up to us, and we're not judging anybody about your views on that, but I dare say that the current administration will probably not have the fervor or zeal pushing electric vehicles that maybe the previous administration did. And the reason I bring that up, and it's a year away, but I'm interested to see the 2025 list when ATRI comes out, if battery electric vehicles even makes the list again. And if it doesn't, it will be a direct result of exactly what Dave Heller said when he shared with you and I both that is 100% a politically driven topic. And so I'm interested to see if it even makes the list next year.
Yeah, it will be interesting because there's some, as you look down through the list, whether it's the driver list, the motor carrier list, the overall list, where you've got some that kind of show up every year, like usually the economy, stuff like that's going to pop up somewhere on the list every year. But that one, it will be interesting to see. So as you said, change in administration, are we pushing this as hard? Barry, I don't know, maybe next year that fuel price thing's back. You just don't know what's going to be important to these folks as they're looking through this stuff, because the main thing for me looking through any of these lists is I feel like the goal is, at least I think that the way that ATRI describes it in how they're doing things and methodology they use, things like that, is it's to make the industry better. And I think if you're the owner of a company out there and you're listening to us today, I think it would be highly beneficial for you to just go to the ATRI website, pull this report, and take a look at what the drivers who they polled, take a look at what they're saying about what their concerns are. And maybe you can look at that and say, okay, well, here's some issues I know that we're probably having within our fleet and that we can discuss with our team and discuss with our drivers and maybe make our workplace a little better for them. And then, look at what your peers are doing as far as motor carrier responses and see if that kind of lines up with you. And certainly think about in the future being part of these polls and being part of the research that ATRI is doing, because it's such, to me, I think it's very valuable. I think it's important information that they're getting. And it's just interesting to see the evolution of our industry and how it's changing, and just based off the concerns of the people that are in it daily. It's something to see, and I think it's important for the motor carriers out there to not overlook this, especially when it comes to the concerns of their drivers.
You know, Mike, I took a guess at what your topic would be, and I said it was either autonomous trucks or battery electric vehicle. And Barry, I'd like your input as a former driver on the. You know, we're talking about the driver's side. Autonomous trucks made the driver list. There's a couple of things I want to comment. Number one, that speaks a little bit to the sophistication of the drivers that participated in this survey, because there's a lot of people that still, if you talk about autonomous vehicle, outside of the driverless cabs and small cars that are in some of our large urban, there's a lot of people that have no idea that autonomous vehicles are making an impact in trucking. And the fact that that shows up on the driver list, number one, it speaks to the fact that drivers are showing a certain degree of awareness of what's going on in the industry. To me, that's complimentary of drivers, of caring about what's going on in the industry. But the flip side of that, and all of us know because we stay up on this topic, it's still very much in its infancy. It is nowhere near starting to replace drivers. But the fact it made the list, think about it. That truck driver list, they're looking at saying, if we get robotic trucks out here that don't have to have a driver, I'm going to lose my job. And I want to say something to all the drivers that listen to our podcast. You're not in any danger of that in any time soon. It is very much still in its infancy. But, you know, the trucking industry looks at autonomous trucking as one answer to the driver shortage that periodically raises its ugly head. Because, you know, if they can't get a driver and yet they need drivers, then one alternative for them is to having a truck that doesn't have to have a driver. But I thought it's not funny, but I thought it spoke volumes that, think about it, the 10 biggest concerns of truck drivers in our nation, the fact that a driverless truck made the list. They are worried about their job. Are these autonomous trucks going to put truck drivers out of work, you know? And we all know that that's years away from happening, if it ever. And there's parts of our industry that'll never go to it. I mean, there's some work that's so special. In fact, the main place we're seeing autonomous trucks now are not even on the highway. They're operating like inside the ports at some of our major seaports. We're seeing it quite a bit in Texas, in West Texas, in the oil field. But it's on oil field lease roads. They're not out on the public highways. There's truck drivers that are taking like frac sand to a silo somewhere, and then an operator will load a trailer, and then an autonomous truck will go from that silo to the well site and deliver frac sand for a fracking operation. But that truck never ever gets on a public highway. It's totally on private roads. So, you know, drivers thinking they're fixing to be replaced en masse, that's not fixing to happen anytime soon.
How prevalent is that down there, Kenny, in the oil patch? Is it? We know there's not many out there, but is is there several companies down there doing that, or?
Oh yeah, and they're pulling revenue generating loads. It's way past the laboratory testing stage. It's, in fact, we've got one company that is running on public highway from Houston to Dallas every day. Autonomous truck, no driver. They go straight down Interstate 45 from Dallas to Houston. The truck exits off the interstate itself, pulls into a safe area. Then a driver gets in it, makes the final delivery in Houston or Dallas. You don't have these driverless trucks driving up and down city streets in Dallas or Houston, but they're on I-45. They're on Interstate 45 from Dallas, 225 miles from Dallas to Houston every day. Because think about it, the three big costs in our industry are fuel, wages, and insurance. Well, if you don't have to have a driver, you take one of those three big cost centers away. The wages are gone. All you got to do now is have insurance and fuel in that truck. It doesn't have to stop for a 30-minute rest break. It doesn't have to stop for meals. It doesn't have to stop for potty breaks. You basically, as long as the truck doesn't need maintenance or fuel, it can just run indefinitely. So, yeah, it's coming, but we're nowhere near drivers. The fact that it makes this list, I think, is an unfounded fear. I want to give some encouragement to our drivers. There's none of y'all out there that are in danger right now of losing your job from autonomous trucks. It's just not going to happen.
And if you look at the motor carrier list, it kind of supports that. I'll make this point first. It's funny that you mentioned that it showed up on the driver list, because I agree. The drivers are paying attention to what's going on. It's not like they're just getting in the truck and driving and just, okay, whatever happens. They're paying attention to what's going on in the industry, because that wouldn't have shown up on their list if they're not. But interestingly enough, the motor carriers, number 3 on their list is driver shortage. So they're thinking about it from the other side, thinking, well, we want to keep the good drivers we got because driver retention's on their list. Things like they want to keep good drivers and find good drivers, but they know it's an issue. So they're looking for alternatives, in the grand scheme of things. And yet on the other side of the list, we've got a concern there that there's going to be lost jobs. So to kind of back up what Kenny's saying there and just reassure you out there, if you're listening to us and you're a truck driver, there's motor carriers out there. If you are a good driver, your job's pretty safe. The person, whoever you're working for, they want to keep you. They want to keep you working for them. They need good drivers. That's certainly something that's displayed on this list, because the driver retention and finding good drivers, the driver shortage is top concerns on the motor carrier side. So as Kenny said, if you have that fear, like, we're going to get replaced, it's not something you need to be concerned with anytime in the near future.
For me, guys, and I know our listeners can't see us, but I'm putting my driver cap on right now. And to me, this is very similar to the ELD mandate. When we saw the information coming out that the mandate was going to come down, we saw the ELD mandate jump up on the concern list. And if you're a driver out there listening, I encourage you, again, don't be discouraged or afraid by this. It's a technology that can definitely help us as drivers. So, again, we're not going to be replaced. And it'll be a way that'll help us as drivers. I'm a big believer in that, because I'll be honest, I was kind of the same way about the ELD mandate. I knew I had some guys that would have a hard time with it and understanding it. But then we see a couple years later, those same drivers that had concerns with it end up loving it. So again, I encourage you, embrace technology, learn as much as you can about it, do your own research, and gather your own opinions on it.
Yeah, because I think, Barry, like you're saying, it may be something where maybe it's a conversation that needs to be had. It's bringing up a concern that people have in the industry, whether it's on the motor carrier side or the driver side. And maybe it's something, just like you said, Barry, with the ELD mandate. Well, the ELDs are not going away. But as the industry evolved, we figured out how to use those. It became less of a concern. There was conversations that happened. And I think that's something you can do with these lists, is look at them and say, okay, well, we've got autonomous trucks are number 9 on the driver list. Well, let's talk about that. Let's have a conversation about that with drivers, because it's their concern. I mean, I think that's an important point you're making.
Yep, no doubt.
Barry, let me ask you this. When you were in your previous life on the motor carrier side, did you guys ever respond to any ATRI polls or their database responses?
Yes, absolutely. And that was one of the kind of sub points that we would bring up in the when they would release it, that the survey was starting. We would, in our safety meeting, bring up to drivers, especially, hey guys, if you've got time on your 10-hour break or whatever while you eat supper or what have you, jump on there and fill this out, because we as an industry value your opinion. This is frontline stuff, guys. And if you don't think that American Trucking Association or any of the associations that your company's probably involved with, if you don't think that they're not taking this information and making it a point to discuss at a much higher level in terms of compliance or anything else, you're dead wrong. Because I've heard countless presentations, on the legislative side with this is the stuff they look at. And as you see with, the American Rescue Plan and a lot of the infrastructure stuff that was put in place previously, they're making it a point to improve truck parking because they saw that it was a definite concern. So I'm very happy that not only is the research being done, but there's something being done with the research. I think that's an important point to make, that people are out there fighting to help combat some of these concerns. And just like Mike said, if you don't fully understand something on the list, or have a conversation, bring it up, because this stuff is important.
Yeah, and I would just encourage anybody listening, when ATRI sends out through their distribution list, and they've got thousands and thousands of people on their distribution list, and a lot of that goes through the state associations. If you remember your state association, or if you see something, if you're out at a trade show or something like that, and you see this report or it opens up, respond to that. If you're a driver, if you're a motor carrier, really there's nobody going to hold you back other than yourself when this comes out. And if you want your concerns to be heard, if you want your voice to be heard, this is a great way to do it, because as Barry said, people are using this. Our state associations that are fighting for us every day, they're using this information. Lawmakers are using this information. It's out there. So if you want your voice to be heard, by all means, reply to those the response or the messages that ATRI send out for these responses, because I think that's a great way to get your voice heard. And again, if you want to see this report, if you're not sure what we're talking about, if you want to see this report, go to atri.trucking.org, find the report, take a look at it, do a little research there, and then maybe this year as it comes around, you'll be able to respond to that when ATRI sends it out.
And guys, the last thing I wanted to bring up was number 3 and 4 on the list. That's lawsuit abuse reform, and number 4 is insurance cost / availability. So, when I think about this and I kind of look at the psychology of, if I'm back when I was a motor carrier, if I'm filling this out, y'all, those go hand in hand. And, if you guys want to comment on that, you feel free to, but when you think about it, as I'm filling this survey out, obviously number 3 should be that high, I think. And then number 4, like I said, that's a direct correlation, because with the more nuclear verdicts we have coming out, the higher the cost of insurance is going to be.
Yeah, those two are definitely connected there, Barry. It's a little cause and effect.
Yes, sir. Well, this has been a great discussion. I'm, Jim always, he wants to claim that he's the nerd of the group, but boy, you put a little research in front of me, and if I get to look at how a survey is done and everything like that, I can really nerd out. But as always, I appreciate my co-hosts. I appreciate the gals behind the scenes who make this possible and make it happen. And most of all, from all of us here at Driving the Line, we appreciate what you do. We appreciate your professionalism. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you next time.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Until the next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.